There's a moment in intimacy that most people never talk about. A moment so loaded with psychology, so heavy with unconscious meaning, that even the man experiencing it can't fully explain what's happening inside him. Carl Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But what actually happens in a man's mind and soul when he enters a woman? What truths hide beneath his breath, behind his closed eyes, within the silence that follows? For too long, we've been told that men are simple, that intimacy for them is purely physical, a biological urge satisfied and forgotten. But Jungian psychology reveals something far more complex, far more human. In that instant of union, a man doesn't just experience pleasure. He confronts his deepest fears, his hidden vulnerabilities, and the parts of himself he's spent his entire life trying to hide. Today, we're going to explore 6 dark psychological truths about what men really feel during intimacy. These aren't surface-level observations or dating advice. These are insights from the depths of the unconscious, from the place where archetypes collide and the soul reveals itself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some men seem distant after sex, why others become unexpectedly attached, and what's really happening beneath the surface when a man's body connects with yours. If you're ready to see intimacy through a completely new lens, one that honors both the light and shadow of masculine psychology, then stay with me. And if these insights resonate with you, please like this video and subscribe to Jungian Mindshift for more deep dives into the psychology of love, desire, and human connection. Let's begin with the first dark truth, one that will completely change how you interpret his intensity, his silence, and his need for control. First layer, the Conqueror Who Kneels, dominance disguising surrender. The first thing you need to understand is this: when a man enters you, he experiences a paradox that splits him in two. On the surface, he may appear dominant, strong, in control. He may take charge, set the rhythm, project confidence. This is the mask, what Jung called the persona. It's the role he believes he must play to be masculine, to be desired, to prove his worth. But underneath that mask, something else is happening. Something he would never admit, even to himself. He is surrendering. In that moment, despite all appearances of control, he is actually giving himself over to something greater than his ego. He's entering a space where he is no longer entirely his own person. His nervous system responds to yours, his breath matches yours, his entire being becomes oriented around you. Your pleasure, your reactions, your acceptance. This is what Jung meant by the union of opposites. The man who appears to be conquering is simultaneously being conquered. The one who seems to dominate is actually at his most vulnerable. Why does this matter? Because this contradiction creates an internal war. His conscious mind tells him he should be strong, detached, in command. But his unconscious knows the truth. He has opened himself completely. He has allowed you to see and feel him in ways no one else does, and in that exposure, he becomes terrified. The shadow of inadequacy awakens. Jung taught that everyone carries a shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, deny, or hide from the world. For many men, the shadow contains their deepest fear: I am not enough. Intimacy forces this shadow into the light. Every movement, every sound you make, every flicker of your expression becomes a potential verdict on his worth. Is she satisfied? Am I doing this right? Does she want someone else? These questions may never reach his conscious mind, but they pulse through his body like a second heartbeat. This is why some men become obsessive about performance. They focus on technique, endurance, your visible reactions, anything that can be measured and controlled. It's not arrogance, it's terror wearing a mask of confidence. Other men respond differently. They become intensely present, almost desperate in their attention. They watch your face, hold you closer, seek eye contact. They're not just seeking pleasure, they're seeking proof that they matter, that this moment means something, that they're not replaceable. The archetypal collision. In Jungian terms, multiple archetypes activate during intimacy. The warrior wants to prove strength and skill. The lover craves connection and beauty. The child needs reassurance and acceptance. The king seeks to give and be recognized for giving. All of these voices speak at once, creating an inner chaos that contradicts the calm exterior he tries to maintain. For women, understanding this changes everything. When you see his need for validation, it's not weakness, it's humanity. When he seems to seek control, recognize that he's actually trying to contain his own vulnerability. And when he asks indirectly, through touch, through lingering looks, through what he does next, was I good enough? Understand that he's asking something deeper. Am I worthy of being chosen again? The first dark truth is this: the man who appears most confident during intimacy is often the one fighting the hardest battle against his own fear of inadequacy. He conquers because he fears being conquered by his own doubts. Layer 2, the witness he cannot escape, while your gaze haunts him. Now we move deeper into something even more uncomfortable for men to acknowledge. During intimacy, you become his mirror, his judge, and his salvation, all at the same time. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But in intimacy, the dynamic is more intense. You don't just irritate or inspire, you reflect back his entire sense of self. The projection of the anima. In Jungian psychology, the anima is the unconscious feminine aspect within every man. It represents his capacity for emotion, intuition, and connection. When a man is intimate with a woman, he unconsciously projects his anima onto her. This means you stop being just yourself. In his unconscious mind, you become the carrier of everything feminine he cannot access within himself. Tenderness, acceptance, emotional depth, nurturing presence. This is why intimacy feels so intense for men, even when they can't explain why. You're not just a woman he's sleeping with. You've become the external manifestation of his own soul, the part of himself he lost touch with, the part he's been searching for without knowing it. The unbearable vulnerability of being seen. Here's what makes this terrifying. If you carry his anima, then your reactions during and after intimacy feel like judgments from his own soul. When you seem pleased, satisfied, connected, he feels whole. His inner masculine and feminine achieve momentary integration. He experiences what Jung called the conjunctio, the sacred union of opposites within himself. But when you seem distant, distracted, or disappointed, he experiences psychic fragmentation. It's as if his own soul has rejected him. The anima he projected onto you now reflects back his unworthiness. This is why men can become strangely obsessed with your pleasure, beyond what seems logical. Your satisfaction isn't just about you. It's about whether he can successfully unite with his own feminine nature through you. The dark side, obsession and possession. This projection has a shadow side that women need to understand for their own protection. When a man unconsciously makes you the carrier of his anima, he may begin to feel that he owns access to his own completeness through you. This is where unhealthy attachment, possessiveness, and even obsession can emerge. He doesn't just want your body. He wants constant access to the feeling of wholeness you provide. When you're unavailable, he feels psychically incomplete. When you withdraw, he experiences it not as your boundary, but as a theft of part of himself. Jung warned about this. Until a man consciously integrates his own anima, he will forever chase it in external women, never satisfied, always seeking the next encounter that promises to make him whole. What this means for women. Understanding this gives you profound clarity. When a man seems unable to let go after intimacy, it's often because he hasn't separated you from his own internal feminine. You've become not just a person, but a symbol. The key to his psychological wholeness. This is not your burden to carry. You cannot heal his fragmented psyche. You cannot be his anima and yourself at the same time. But knowing this truth allows you to respond with wisdom rather than confusion. His intensity isn't always love. Sometimes it's projection. His need for you isn't always genuine connection. Sometimes it's dependence on what you represent in his unconscious. The second dark truth. You become the mirror in which he sees not just himself, but the parts of his soul he cannot access alone. And that makes you both powerful and dangerously responsible for his sense of wholeness, a responsibility that is not actually yours to carry. Third layer, the chemical betrayal, how his body bonds against his will. Let's talk about something men rarely discuss: the biological betrayal that happens during intimacy. Many men enter sexual encounters believing they can remain emotionally detached. They tell themselves it's just physical, just pleasure, just a moment in time, and then their body turns against them. The neurochemistry of attachment. During sexual intimacy, the male brain floods with oxytocin, vasopressin, and dopamine. These aren't just feel-good chemicals, they're bonding agents. The same neurochemical cocktail that bonds a mother to her infant now bonds him to you. His nervous system begins memorizing everything: your scent, the texture of your skin, the sound of your voice, the specific way your body responds. These memories don't stay polite and contained in his conscious mind. They sink into his limbic system, into the ancient parts of his brain that govern attachment and survival. Here's what makes this dark. Even if he consciously decides he doesn't want attachment, even if he tells himself this meant nothing, his body has already decided otherwise. The shadow of unwanted feelings. This creates a profound psychological conflict. The man who prides himself on emotional control suddenly finds himself thinking about you at unexpected moments. He might catch your scent on his skin hours later and feel a pull he doesn't want. He might see something that reminds him of you and experience a surge of longing that makes him angry at himself. Jung would recognize this as the shadow asserting itself. The feelings he tried to exile, need, tenderness, longing for connection, refused to stay buried. They return through his body, through his biochemistry, through the bond his nervous system created without his permission. This is why you'll see men do contradictory things after intimacy. He texts you constantly, then suddenly goes silent for days. He acts cold and distant, then shows up wanting to be close again. He insists it meant nothing but can't seem to stay away. He's not playing games. He's at war with himself, with the chemical bond his body created against his conscious will. The imprint that won't fade. Here's something most men won't tell you. After intimacy with someone who truly moved them, that woman becomes a ghost they carry. She becomes the standard against which all future encounters are measured. This is the anima imprint Jung spoke of. The first woman who awakens a man's soul, who matches the unconscious feminine ideal he carries, leaves a mark that may never fully heal. He can sleep with dozens of others, but part of him will always be searching for that specific resonance, that particular frequency of connection. This is why men sometimes suddenly reach out months or years later. It's not that they've been thinking of you constantly, it's that something triggered the imprint, and suddenly the bond his body created comes flooding back. What women need to know. This biological bonding is neither romantic nor simple. It means that casual sex is far more complicated for men than they pretend. Their conscious mind may believe in detachment, but their unconscious and their body are creating attachment anyway. For you, this means his distance after intimacy isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's self-protection. He feels the bond forming and it terrifies him, so he runs, not from you, but from the loss of control, from the vulnerability of needing someone, from the chemical betrayal of his own nervous system. The third dark truth: his body bonds to you through chemistry he cannot control, creating attachments that contradict his conscious intentions. He may pretend intimacy meant nothing, but his nervous system has already decided you matter, and that terrifies him more than you know. Layer 4, the death of the ego. Why orgasm feels like annihilation. We've reached the darkest layer, the one men almost never speak about because it touches on something that feels too close to death itself. The little death. The French call orgasm la petite mort, the little death. This isn't poetic exaggeration. It's psychological truth. At the moment of climax, something in a man temporarily dies. His ego, the structure he uses to maintain his sense of identity, control, and separateness from the world, dissolves. For a few seconds, he doesn't know where he ends and you begin. He loses the boundary between self and other. Jung understood this as a momentary return to the Ouroboros, the original state of undifferentiated wholeness. For those few seconds, a man experiences what mystics and psychologists call ego death. the complete surrender of individual consciousness into something larger. And it's absolutely terrifying. Why men fear the surrender? From the time boys are young, they're taught that losing control is weakness. Masculinity is constructed around boundaries, strength, autonomy, and emotional regulation. A real man doesn't lose himself. He doesn't cry out. He doesn't surrender to anything or anyone. Then comes orgasm, an experience that demands complete surrender. In that moment, he cannot maintain the mask. He cannot control how his face looks, what sounds he makes, how his body convulses. He is utterly exposed, completely vulnerable, temporarily annihilated as an individual self. This is why some men close their eyes, turn their face away, or become silent during climax. They're trying to hide the moment of ego death from you and from themselves. They can't prevent the dissolution, but they can try to conceal it. The shadow fear, losing himself forever. Here's the dark psychology few discuss. In the back of many men is minds lives a primitive fear that if they surrender too completely, they might not come back, that they might lose themselves permanently in another person. Jung called this engulfment anxiety, the fear of being swallowed by the feminine, of losing individual identity in merger with another. It's an archetypal fear, ancient and powerful. This fear manifests in different ways. Some men become emotionally distant immediately after climax, rebuilding their ego boundaries as quickly as possible. Others avoid deep intimacy altogether, keeping sex purely physical to prevent the full ego dissolution. Still others swing between desperate closeness and sudden withdrawal, caught between the longing to merge and the terror of losing themselves. The integration challenge. Jung taught that true psychological growth requires accepting both merger and separation, both dissolution and reformation. A mature man learns to surrender into the little death without panic, trusting that he will reconstitute himself afterward, perhaps even more whole than before. But most men never reach this integration. Instead, they live in the contradiction, craving the intensity of full surrender while simultaneously fearing it, seeking the profound connection that orgasm offers while building walls against the vulnerability it requires. What this reveals. When a man truly surrenders during intimacy, when he lets you witness his ego dissolution without trying to hide or control it, that's when you're seeing his soul. That momentary death of the self, that brief annihilation of his carefully constructed identity, that's the ultimate vulnerability, and how you respond to witnessing that death shapes whether he can ever trust you with it again. The fourth dark truth. Orgasm is not just pleasure for a man. It's a temporary death of the ego. A surrender so complete it touches his deepest fear of losing himself entirely. His distance afterward isn't indifference. It's his desperate attempt to rebuild the self that momentarily dissolved inside you. Layer 5. The ritual of return. How he rebuilds himself from your presence. What happens after? The moment when the bodies separate, when the breathing slows, when silence fills the space. This is when the real psychological work begins. The fragmented self seeks reconstitution. After the ego dissolution of orgasm, a man faces a critical task. He must rebuild his sense of self. He must reconstruct the boundaries between himself and you. He must recover his individual identity while integrating what just happened. Jung called this the process of reconstitution, returning to individuality after merger. And this is where a woman's presence becomes absolutely crucial. The two paths of aftermath. Here's where men diverge dramatically, and it depends entirely on how safe they feel. Path 1. The defended reconstruction. If a man feels unsafe, judged, used, or uncertain of acceptance, he rebuilds through defense. He becomes distant, quiet, or even cold. He may physically turn away, check his phone, or find reasons to leave. This isn't cruelty, it's survival. He's pulling back into his shell, reconstructing his ego boundaries by creating physical and emotional distance. The message his unconscious sends is, I became too vulnerable. I must protect myself now. This is the man who seems fine during sex, but becomes a stranger afterward. Path 2. The integrated reconstruction. If a man feels genuinely safe, Accepted, witnessed without judgment, held without demands, he can rebuild through connection rather than defense. He stays close. He wants to talk, to touch, to maintain some thread of contact. This man is attempting integration rather than dissociation. He's allowing the vulnerability of ego death to inform his reconstituted self rather than defending against it. He's bringing the shadow into consciousness rather than splitting it off. This is the man who becomes more tender, more open, more emotionally available after intimacy. The sacred role of aftercare. Here's what most people don't understand. Aftercare isn't optional. It's not just being nice or considerate. It's a psychological necessity. How you respond to a man after intimacy directly shapes his ability to integrate the experience rather than dissociate from it. If you immediately become distant or distracted, you confirm his fear that he was used, that the vulnerability meant nothing. If you offer judgment or criticism, you wound the exposed psyche that hasn't yet rebuilt its defenses. If you make demands or seek validation for yourself, you prevent him from completing his own psychological reconstitution. But if you offer simple presence, a touch, a soft word, continued closeness without agenda, you become the container in which he can safely rebuild himself. The difference between men who evolve and those who don't. Men who consistently experience safe reconstitution after intimacy gradually integrate their vulnerability. They learn that ego death isn't permanent destruction, but temporary dissolution followed by a more authentic reformation. These men become capable of deeper intimacy over time. They stop splitting sex from emotion, body from soul. Men who consistently experience defended reconstruction remain fragmented. They learn to keep sex and vulnerability separate, to rebuild through distance and defense, to never fully surrender because the aftermath is too threatening. These men become increasingly detached, even as they crave connection. Your role and your boundaries. Understanding this gives you power and responsibility, but not obligation. You are not required to provide aftercare to anyone. You are not responsible for a man's psychological integration. But if you choose to offer presence after intimacy, know that you're doing sacred work. You're helping another human being reconstruct themselves after a profound vulnerability. You're becoming the witness to their return from ego death. And if a man cannot or will not allow that presence, if he must flee or defend immediately after climax, know that he's showing you the depth of his wounding, the fear that runs so deep he cannot risk being seen in the process of becoming himself again. The fifth dark truth. The moments after intimacy reveal whether a man can integrate vulnerability or must defend against it. How you witness his return from ego death shapes whether he becomes more whole or more fragmented, more open or more defended, capable of love or trapped in fear. Layer 6. The possession risk. When intimacy becomes psychological entrapment. We've explored 5 layers of masculine psychology during intimacy, but there's one final truth that's perhaps the most dangerous and least discussed: the risk of psychological possession, the shadow that refuses integration. When a man doesn't do the inner work of integrating his anima, his unconscious feminine, he remains psychologically fragmented. This creates a devastating pattern where sex and emotional connection become dissociated from one another, and men can become addicted to sex because it provides validation that substitutes for genuine intimacy and connection with their own souls. Here's what this looks like in real life. A man enters intimacy seeking not just pleasure but psychological completion, because he hasn't integrated his own capacity for emotion, vulnerability, and depth. He unconsciously seeks these qualities through you. Each sexual encounter becomes an attempt to temporarily feel whole. But here's the trap: the wholeness never lasts. The moment the encounter ends, the fragmentation returns. So he seeks another encounter and another, chasing an integration that can only come from within, but that he continues to project outward. The dark side of the anima projection. When a man narcissistically expects women to fulfill his every need, this violates the masculine spirit and makes men weak and codependent, as they live to win approval and validation. This isn't love, it's possession. In this state, a man doesn't see you as a separate person with your own needs, boundaries, and inner life. You become a psychological object, the carrier of his unintegrated feminine, the key to his temporary sense of wholeness, the drug that temporarily silences his inner fragmentation. This is why some men become obsessive after intimacy. It's not passionate love, it's psychological desperation. They're not attached to you. They're attached to what you represent in their unconscious, the promise of integration without the work of actually integrating. The cycle of possession and desperation. Here's how this plays out in patterns women recognize but rarely understand. He pursues intensely, making you feel like the most important person in his world. During this phase, his anima projection is fully active. You represent everything he lacks within himself. After intimacy, he experiences temporary integration. He feels complete, whole, alive. This is the honeymoon feeling that makes some men seem deeply bonded after sex. But then reality returns. The biochemical high fades. His fragmented psyche reasserts itself. And suddenly, the wholeness he felt through you is gone, leaving him more aware of his incompleteness than before. Now comes the critical moment. Does he blame you for taking away his wholeness? Does he become demanding, needy, or angry that you won't provide constant access to the completion you represent? Or does he flee, overwhelmed by the dependency he feels, cycling to the next woman who might offer a fresh promise of integration? The warning signs of anima possession. A man who is anima possessed seeks superficial relationships and often pursues the stereotypical trophy wife, living only for appearances. Jung would warn you to recognize these patterns. He seems to need constant validation of his desirability. His pursuit feels intense but shallow, more about conquest than connection. He becomes disproportionately upset when you're unavailable. He struggles to see you as separate from his needs. His moods seem dependent on your responses to him. He talks about past relationships in terms of what women gave him or took from him, never about mutual growth. These aren't signs of passion. They're signs of psychological possession. A man trapped in projecting his unintegrated feminine onto external women, forever seeking completion outside himself. The painful truth about serial intimacy. The very intensity of these projections, the immediate attraction, the sense of destiny, the feeling of finding one's missing half, often signals that someone is seeing their own unconscious material reflected in another person, rather than seeing them clearly. This explains men who move from relationship to relationship, always starting with intensity and ending in disillusionment. They're not really seeking you, they're seeking the anima, the internal feminine they refuse to integrate. And because you're a real person rather than an archetypal symbol, you will inevitably disappoint the impossible role they've unconsciously cast you in. The cycle repeats: projection, temporary integration through intimacy, disillusionment when you reveal yourself as human rather than archetypal, withdrawal or anger, then a new projection onto a new woman. What makes this layer dark? This sixth layer is dark because it reveals how intimacy can become a prison for both people. For the man, it becomes an addiction, a repeated attempt to find externally what can only be found internally. For the woman, it becomes an impossible burden, being made responsible for another person's psychological wholeness, which was never yours to provide. You cannot carry the burden of his self-worth, and when validation becomes the only goal rather than genuine connection, it enslaves both partners. Understanding this protects you. When you recognize anima possession, you can make a conscious choice. This man needs psychological work I cannot provide. His intensity isn't about me, it's about what I represent to his unconscious. And I deserve to be seen as myself, not as the carrier of someone else's unintegrated psyche. The path beyond possession. The anima demands that men get their hands dirty and have the audacity to carve their own path, as she only reveals herself to those who prove to be worthy. Jung believed that men must do this inner work themselves. No woman can do it for them. A man who has begun integrating his anima shows different patterns. He can be alone without feeling incomplete. He seeks intimacy for connection, not validation. He sees you as a separate person with your own inner life. He takes responsibility for his own emotional state. His attraction is rooted in who you are, not what you represent. This is the man who has confronted his own psychological fragmentation and is actively working toward integration. He may still project at times, we all do, but he catches himself, takes responsibility, and does the inner work rather than demanding you fix his incompleteness. The sixth dark truth. When a man hasn't integrated his own inner feminine, intimacy becomes not connection but possession, a desperate attempt to find wholeness through you rather than within himself. His intensity may feel like love, but it's often psychological dependence disguised as desire, and no amount of your presence can heal what only his own inner work can address. The mirror, the shadow, and the soul. We've journeyed through 6 dark psychological truths about what men experience during intimacy. First, the conqueror who kneels, dominance disguising surrender. Second, the witness he cannot escape, how your gaze carries his projected anima. Third, the chemical betrayal, biological bonding that contradicts conscious intention. Fourth, the death of the ego, orgasm as temporary annihilation. Fifth, the ritual of return, reconstitution through presence or defense. Sixth, the possession risk, when intimacy becomes psychological entrapment. Carl Jung taught us that the meeting of 2 personalities is like the contact of 2 chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Intimacy is never just physical. It's a psychological crucible where men confront their shadow, project their anima, surrender their ego, and either integrate or fragment based on what happens next. For women, understanding these truths offers profound clarity. When a man pulls away after sex, you now know he may be defending against attachment his body created without permission. When he becomes unexpectedly intense, you recognize the projection of his anima seeking wholeness through you. When he seems obsessed with your reactions, you see the shadow of inadequacy demanding proof of worth. And most importantly, you understand that none of this is your burden to fix. You are not responsible for his psychological integration. You cannot heal his shadow or become his anima. You can only choose whether to offer presence or protect your own boundaries. Both are valid. For men watching this, the invitation is clear. Consciousness is the path to freedom. Until you become aware of these unconscious dynamics, they will control you. Your fear will masquerade as detachment. Your need will hide behind conquest. Your vulnerability will express as distance. But when you bring these shadows into light, when you accept that intimacy means surrendering the ego while trusting you'll reconstitute afterward, when you learn to integrate rather than dissociate, that's when you become capable of true connection. That's when intimacy becomes not a test of masculinity, but a path to wholeness. If this exploration resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Jungian Mindshift. We explore the depths of human psychology, the archetypes that shape our relationships, and the shadow work that leads to authentic love. Share this with someone who needs to understand the complexity beneath the surface, who's tired of simplistic explanations for complicated feelings. In our next video, we'll explore the feminine shadow, the dark psychology of what women won't admit about their own desires, fears, and the animus they project onto men. Until then, remember this. Intimacy is the place where 2 souls meet in their most vulnerable form, and in that meeting, both are forever changed.